So I am going to present on the Institute on Counselor Wellness, and I'm going to first tell you a little bit about what the tank looks like so that you have some history about what the tank looks like, so you know where we're leaping into the blue water of the innovation. I'm going to start with a quote. There is a soul weariness that comes with caring, from daily doing business with the handiwork of fear. Sometimes it lives at the edges of one's life, brushing against hope and barely making its presence known. At other times, it comes crashing in, overtaking one with its vivid images of another's terror. We know that the incidence of trauma is quite high in the United States. In fact, as clinical mental health counselors, this is our vocation. Our vocation is to, and our calling is to ease the suffering of those who have been affected by trauma. Each year, more than 10 million children in the United States endure the trauma of abuse, violence, natural disasters, and other adverse events. PTSD also affects those in our armed services, those who have served in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, the Gulf War. In addition, the number of violent victimizations is rising each year, and the National Institute of Mental Health reports that approximately 7.7 million people in the United States suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. As clinical mental health counselors, we seek to ease the suffering of those who have been affected by these traumatic events. And in fact, between 82 and 94% of those clients that we see have some sort of trauma in their history. In the applied psychology department, and particularly in the I'm working with the clinical mental health counseling department. We are training students in order to understand what they need to do to put themselves in the best position to ease the suffering of those who have been affected by trauma. And we work with, currently we have close to 100 students who are doing their practical work in agencies and different environments throughout New England and beyond. So in addition to teaching them in the classroom, they're also required to do 1 to 2 hours of practical work in an agency under a clinical mental health counselor. Counselors are the instrument of the trade. We use ourselves in order to help ease the suffering of others. And among the tools that we have in our toolbox and that we teach our students are empathy and compassion. And empathy actually involves going into the world of the other person, utilizing our own knowledge of emotions, of our own experiences, and trying to understand that world of the other. And compassion involves really caring about easing the suffering of the other. And in fact, research shows that empathy, non-judgment, tolerance, and openness are all the qualities that are necessary for therapeutic change. So these are the qualities that clients need to feel from us in order to have that therapeutic change. What we also know is that even though we have this training and we are training our students to do this, we also are biologically hardwired to respond to these stories of trauma that we hear. So we're biologically primed to seek survival data at all times. Even though we're trained to do this and we're trained to have empathy, at all times our brains are reacting to these stories of trauma that we hear. And then in addition, we're biologically primed to remember this survival data. So if you remember, between 82 to 94% of our clients have experienced trauma. Think about the number of stories that clinical mental health counselors hear time and time again. And this is what we're training our students to go out and do. And they're actually doing that in the field right now. As folks begin to notice that this was having an effect on the clinicians themselves, there's been a lot of research on the effect that listening to these stories of trauma has on clinical mental health counselors. So what does the research say? The research says that a large number of folks who are interacting in a helping role with those who've been affected by trauma are having negative effects themselves. 37% of a sample of child protective workers reported clinical levels of emotional distress. So the helper is having the same clinical level of emotional distress as the client. Trauma counselors, the level of psychological distress, almost twice of that of a non-patient population. Continued research showed that the number of symptoms that clinical mental health counselors can experience include this laundry list: diminished concentration, decreased self-esteem, trauma imagery, numbness, we go on, flashbacks, irritability, anxiety, alienation, feelings of insanity. And other reports include the percentages, the very high percentages of the types of negative effects. So this is the tank. This is still in the tank. We know this. This is the research that we have about the effects that our work can have on the clinician themselves. The term for this, secondary traumatic stress, refers to the presence of post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms caused by at least one indirect exposure, so by hearing at least one story of trauma. And as you remember, most of us have between 82 to 94% of our clients experience this. Secondary traumatic stress is a natural response to working with traumatized individuals. We know this. We know it's a neurobiological response. It's not a response of weakness. It's not similar to burnout in other jobs. This is something that is from listening to the trauma material. And prevalence in counselors is estimated at about 45.9% on any given day. This can go up and down. So the American Counseling Association developed a task force on counselor wellness to develop strategies, evidence-based strategies on how to decrease the effect of secondary traumatic stress on counselors. And one of the outcomes has been this promotion of counselor wellness, not as self-care, not as I spend an hour on the weekend doing some sort of caregiving for myself. This is something that has to be intentional every day so that counselors can optimize their ability to work with those who are suffering from the effects of trauma. So what has happened since then is that counselor educators, counseling supervisors, administrators of mental health agencies are all heading out in their boat against the rough waters of secondary traumatic stress with this mission that we need to promote counselor wellness. And they're faced with all of these challenges to doing. I really concur with that idea of this individual responsibility. Our students know, and we teach them, that you have the responsibility, it is your ethical obligation to maintain wellness. Yet they have time constraints, there's challenges of family challenges. They're working in agencies where many of the agencies are facing financial constraints. There's increased number of caseload expectations. Oftentimes, clinical supervisors are also serving as administrative supervisors. So not only are they responsible for the clinical wellness of their clients and their students, but and their clinicians, but they also have to maintain the financial stability of the agency. So these are the rough waters that individually these silos of folks in our profession are dealing with. And they're each dealing with it in silos and really not doing a super job at it. So we have the research around what the effects of secondary traumatic stress are. We have evidence-based strategies around how to mitigate the effects of secondary traumatic stress. And we have folks that are out there trying to do so, yet here comes the blue water. We have no comprehensive model for how to bring everybody together to do this. At Antioch University, we are in a unique place because we have students that come through from throughout New England and beyond, and these students are working in agencies, over 100 agencies throughout New England, doing their practical experience. So we are in the position to have contact with each one of these agencies, and we also have an affiliation agreement and a contract with each one of the clinical supervisors. So we're in this position where we overlap with these different silos. So we work with our students, work with the clinical supervisors, we have the educators here, we work with the administrators at each one of these agencies and the clinicians. So the innovation, the innovative idea is to say, let's take all of this research, what we know about evidence-based strategies, and create a comprehensive model of what it would look like. How do we develop standards for practice that are not just standards for practice that sit on the back of the individual student or the individual clinical supervisor, but are actually standards of practice for our profession that then can be replicated nationally. So the Institute on Counselor Wellness is an opportunity to bring all of these folks together. And first of all, to develop a shared understanding. So the first step is to develop that content, that shared understanding about what we know about secondary traumatic stress and what are the evidence-based strategies around how to mitigate the effects of secondary traumatic stress. But that's just one piece of it, because oftentimes we have these opportunities to learn about the research, but then we get back to all of the rough waters that we're all dealing with and don't know what to do with it. So the second part is to develop a shared vision. And the shared vision will initially start with us here at Antioch, our students, and the agencies with whom we have these agreements. So agencies throughout New England. And we're going to develop standards of practice based on the current research. So we're going to develop a shared vision about what it's going to look like when we hit the ground running. And we're going to identify individual and systemic responsibility. So each person will have a responsible role in the implementation of this model. So that then we can get back to the bottom line. The real reason for our vocation is to really decrease the suffering of those who have been affected by trauma events.